think number 2 on our running order was the Chris Eubank Jr. segment. Is that correct, Eamon? Can you? Yes, it is. I've just double checked. So Vinny, Mod Father Vinny, if you can hear me, we are going to be talking about Eubank Jr. now. And we've got to be very careful what we say, because for anyone that missed it, Chris Eubank Jr., who's part of the Dmitry Bivol, Artur Beterbiev undercard in a few weeks' time, went on a bit of a rant, or a lot of a rant, at the press conference last week in London, and was quickly compelled, shall we say, persuaded to apologise, as was Frank Warren, who was one of the main targets of his tirade. Basically went into business for himself, Eubank Jr., and verbally abused not only Frank Warren, Eddie Hearn, Kalle Sauerland, but also his de facto brother-in-law in Matchroom CEO Frank Smith, which we asked Frank about. He was rather bemused by the whole thing last week, and only really gave credit to Turki Al-Sheikh, who's obviously paying him a hell of a lot of money, I would imagine, for his fight on that undercard. But also Ben Shalom, who he called a cool guy. Eamon, while we can't quote verbatim what Chris Eubank Jr. said for obvious reasons, we don't want to get sued. I'm not going to beat around the bush. What do you make of his outburst? And was it, as some have suggested, purely a reason to increase interest in a fight that was rather underwhelming to most?
No, I don't think that's what it was, because for me, like, that doesn't sell the fight anymore. I'm not tuning into Chris Eubank Jr. to handle Kamil Szeremeta any easier than I would have thought it would, or it doesn't make the fight any more exciting or any more fireworks from it, because Kamil Szeremeta isn't fighting the battle of the promoters here, although maybe some of them might want Kamil to come out on top off of the back of that tirade from Eubank Jr. I don't think it is that. I think Eubank Jr. has obviously had a gripe for a long time with certain people and wanted to express that where he could be the most loudest, and he picked his moment, and he got the repercussions of that moment as well too. I wouldn't doubt that maybe there's a few boxers retired or otherwise that maybe might have a little bit of a smile, but also some boxers who might think, maybe that wasn't the right thing to do as well. Maybe you should handle that behind the scenes as well, and maybe stick it to the promoters if you feel that way, with victories, with your successes, with your moments in the sun. And that's the way that you can really kind of get back at them. But it was, with that said, it was very entertaining. I did find that a very amusing moment, not because of who he was going at, but just because of how kind of out of the blue it seemed to be. And it did kind of cause a bit of a stir in amongst the media as well too for Chris, who maybe, look, it all seems smoothed over for now, but we'll see if Chris does end up fighting on that undercard. Who knows what might change in the background, and who, and if the fight does go ahead. Hopefully it does, and I don't think anything will happen, but stranger things have happened in boxing. But Chris certainly picked a moment in time to share his thoughts with the world, and he's since had to. And also Frank Warren, I believe, has also said, look, we'll put this to bed now. It's been said, it's been done. Let's move on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see much hope of Eubank being put to bed in that fight. So if the promoters are vesting their interests in his opponent, I don't see him being very satisfied by the outcome. But yeah, I see your point. I guess, no one's going to tune in just because of a press conference rant, although the rant itself, I'm sure, got a huge amount of views across social media. I don't know if Eubank Jr. planned it or not, and how sincere it was. There was the kind of the remarks directed at Eddie Hearn and Frank Smith regarding the Conor Benn fight didn't seem to chime with the attitude of Eubank and his team at the time. He seemed just as keen for the fight to still go ahead after Conor Benn's drug test as anyone else was. So I'm not sure how sincere or authentic his comments were, but I know Frank Warren's reaction was certainly real. He was absolutely fuming from what I could see. So yeah, I'm not surprised that whoever it was got the two of them in a room. Probably not, because that would have been combustible, but got the two of them separately and, talked both parties down and got those apologies issued. And now we can look forward to the show itself. But it did certainly liven up what was not necessarily a drab affair, but not the most exciting press conference I've ever been to before that. Let me just see, what have we got? Jam Edwards says, I think Derek James and Ben Davison should join forces to train AJ for the Dubois rematch, as he will have the power and the defense. It's interesting. I remember asking Tyson Fury before the Dillian Whyte fight if he'd consider bringing Ben Davison back into the team. And he said, yeah, because he'd be really good at kind of the movement and the defensive side. And he had Sugar Hill for the aggressive offensive side. So I don't know if they ever would work together, Derek James and Ben Davison. But, you know, if AJ can't get two more influential trainers to join forces, then I'm not sure anyone can. Sultan Ibrahimov says, also, people forgetting AJ's age. Is he too old to learn new tricks? Can he develop much more at this stage in his career? Feel his downsides will now always be there. Yeah, I think it's as much about experience as age. I think when you've established patterns, when you do the same thing for a long time, regardless of whether you're, 30 or 40, I think it is much harder to adapt and to alter your style to any great degree. It's more about refining what you're good at and kind of minimizing what you're bad at. Don't put yourself in positions where your flaws can be exposed, I guess would be the main issue there. James Sauce says, massive undercard for Bivol, Beterbiev, Wardley Clark, etc. should be big. Yeah, I mean, that's an element of this as well. I felt that Eubank Jr.'s rant, whether, he meant it to cause the stir it did or not, I'm sure he did. He's a great self-promoter. It took away a lot of the shine from the rest of the undercard, and Eubank Jr.'s fight is one of the least competitive on paper. So that in itself was a bit disappointing. I think the Wardley Clark rematch looks certain to be a banger. So I'm looking forward to that. And a lot of the fights on the undercard are really interesting. But yeah, so it's a shame, Jack Massey going into the Jaya Pattaya fight with real confidence, although, not many people outside of his team are giving him a chance of winning it. He certainly believes he can. And a number of the other fights on there, really, really interesting to watch. So it's a shame that the focus has been on Eubank, including here. I mean, I'm not being hypocritical about it. Our focus has been on Eubank because it's what caused the most commotion at the time. DB Coop 1 says, Hearn keeps saying Eubank's rant was planned, but Junior was almost tearing up speaking out. That was raw and brutally honest, as you YouTube merchants would say. We try not to use raw, to be honest. Steven says, surprised by Eubank, what he was saying so broad, leaving what he was saying up to interpretation. Thought he was more clever than that. Yeah, I mean, he obviously wanted it to be. And let me just say this as well. Eubank Jr. will know that even after the apologies and people may have taken down some of the quotes or whatever else because of the threat of legal action, he'll know that will live forever. Those clips will never, he can't unsay the quotes. So he'll know that will have caused the commotion, that will cause people to question what was going on, regardless of, any apologies that happened later on. Thunder Road says, why would anyone get sued for repeating what Eubank said? It's newsworthy and does not mean you're endorsing the accusation. Yeah, I mean, it is a tricky one, though, because if you're saying some of the stuff Eubank said does fall into defamation, and you can say it's in public interest, but then you have to have the money available to fight the case, regardless of whether you think you're in the right or not. So it's a minefield. Jam Edwards says, Frank Warren's face was priceless when Eubank went off on his rant. Fizz says, if AJ wants to continue, he has to rematch and beat Dubois to be taken seriously. Sultan Ibrahimov says, to be honest, Eubank only knew of one of Ben's failed tests at the time. The one he failed before signing was withheld from him. Even if that's the case, I mean, does it make a difference how many positive tests? If someone you're scheduled to fight tests positive for a performance-enhancing substance and you're still willing to fight them despite that, it's not really fair to criticize other people for wanting the fight to go ahead, is it?